Welcome to the June 2021 Acting for Justice presentation. My name is Jack Jezreel. I serve on the staff of JustFaith Ministries, and I'm delighted that you all could join us tonight. I'd like to highlight that the year 2021 is our 20th anniversary. What began as a single program called JustFaith 20 years ago has evolved into an organization with more than a dozen programs on an array of topics from hunger to racism, to climate change, to spirituality, all supporting the work and growth of social mission across the country. Over 65,000 people have participated in our programs, and the impact is that many, many people's lives have changed, deflected, if you will, in the direction of human suffering, in the cause of seeking justice, and in response to the cry of the earth. Those 65,000 people have almost certainly touched 1 million lives or more. You'll hear more about our 20th anniversary celebration this September and the months to come, but let me just mention right now, to mark your calendar, the first 4 Thursdays of September, there'll be special events highlighting our 20th anniversary. I'd like to begin this evening, as we always do, with a prayer. Tonight's prayer includes a meditation that highlights the integral connection between our bodies and the environment. So let us pray.
Without wind, most of the earth would be uninhabitable. The tropics would grow so unbearably hot that nothing could live there, and the rest of the planet would freeze. Moisture, if any existed, would be confined to the oceans, and all but the fringe of the great continents would be desert. There would be no erosion, no soil, and for any community that managed to evolve despite these rigors, no relief from suffocation by their own waste products. But with the wind, Earth comes truly alive. Winds provide the circulatory and nervous systems of the planet, sharing out energy and information, distributing both warmth and awareness, making something out of nothing. All wind's properties are borrowed. Our knowledge of it comes at secondhand, but it comes strongly. And this combination of a force that cannot be apprehended, but nevertheless has been an undeniable existence, was our first experience of the spiritual. A crack in the cosmos that widened to let the tide of consciousness flow through. We are the fruits of the wind and have been seeded, irrigated, and cultivated by its craft. Like the wind causes our earth to come truly alive, so too our breath powers our beating hearts. We will now take a couple of minutes to honor our breath. Let us find a comfortable position, sitting upright, relaxing our shoulders. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. Rest your hands with your palms facing up in a posture to signify the receptiveness to God's love. Begin to notice your breath's natural rhythm. Notice how your body knows when to inhale and exhale on its own. There's no need to think about it. When one breath ends, the next one begins. Now let's take a big inhale as we breathe in God's presence. Then, as we exhale, Let us send peace to each other. Let's do that 2 more times. Breathing in peace, sending peace to others. Breathing in peace, sending peace to others. When you feel ready, open your eyes.
Father Joe Mitchell is a Passionist priest. Joe received his training in theology at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago and earned a graduate degree in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness from the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. He was the founder of and currently serves as president of the Passionist Earth and Spirit Center in Louisville, Kentucky, an organization inspired by Thomas Berry and dedicated to earth and human flourishing. He's highly regarded here in Louisville as one of the finest teachers you'll ever experience. Joe is also my breakfast buddy, so when there are no pandemics, we gather for coffee and almost monthly solve most of the world's problems before the second cup. So my Just Faith friends, it is my pleasure to welcome my friend, Father Joe Mitchell, to our gathering. Father Joe.
Well, Jack, how sweet is that? I've not had such a sweet introduction before. Thank you. Well, thank you, Jack, Leela, for the invitation to be with you all. And greetings to everyone, wherever you are. It's what a wonderful opportunity we have to be together. Even though we can't physically be together, this has opened up, the pandemic has opened up so many new possibilities of connecting like this to talk about really matters of great importance for us and for our world. And that's what we'll be addressing tonight. So I'm going to have a PowerPoint with most of my presentation. And I'm going to share that right now. And so I've been asked to talk about seeds of hope for our planet, and particularly responding to Pope Francis' call in Laudato Si to care for our common home. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use insights from Thomas Berry to help guide us in this process. And I'll be drawing upon what Thomas Berry outlined as the great work of our time. So I'll give a full introduction to Thomas Berry in just a few minutes. But the topic, Seeds of Hope for Our Planet, of course, is the issue that Pope Francis addresses in Laudato Si. So Laudato Si is right now the North Star for Christians engaging in these issues of caring for the earth and caring for the poor. Laudato Si is Pope Francis's landmark encyclical on caring for our common home. And on May 21st, just last month, was the 6th anniversary of the publication of Laudato Si. And the theme of the celebration was, we know that things can change. So Pope Francis begins Laudato Si by saying that he would like to enter into a dialogue with all people about our common home. So with that, I want to give you an overview of what I'd like to cover this evening or this afternoon, wherever you are. I'm going to talk about, first of all, part one, what is our current situation? Part two, how did we get here? Part three, what's possible for the future? And part four, where do we go from here? So if any of you are involved in the medical profession, you might recognize that what I'm doing is I'm going to offer a diagnosis of the symptoms and signs of suffering that are going on right now on our planet. So a diagnosis to assess what is the problem. Secondly, in etiology, we're going to look at the cause or the origin of the problem or the suffering. And then a prognosis for our disease. And that is, in other words, guidance for coming out of the plight. And then finally, what's the treatment? What's the prescription necessary that will lead us to a cure? And that's very important because it's one thing to have a correct diagnosis, another to have an etiology or understanding the cause of it and the prognosis. But also, if there's going to be a cure, we must actually take the medicine, and that's the treatment. Now, I'm going to spend actually much of the time on parts 2 and 3. I'm going to offer some guidance and where to go with part 4. Let me fill this out a bit. This 4-part presentation of the program falls nicely in line with the way Pope Francis has outlined Laudato Si. As many of you know, chapter 1 of Laudato Si, he addresses and talks about what is happening to our common home. And then in chapter 2, he talks about the gospel of creation, the role of faith in addressing this situation. Now, I put that there indented because I'm not going to really talk about that chapter of the encyclical tonight. Chapter 3 of Laudato Si offers an analysis of the cause, the roots of the ecological crisis. Then chapter 4, Pope Francis talks about what's possible for the future, and he calls it an integral ecology. And then finally, in part 5, chapter 5 and 6, he talks about where we can go from here, and that is approaches for action, and then also an ecological education and spirituality. That's where he sees us going from here. So those 6 chapters of Laudato Si, I'm not going to be going into those exactly because I imagine most of you have read those, and this is not a talk on Laudato Si itself, but rather it's how Thomas Berry can help us understand perhaps and give us a different angle on what Pope Francis is talking about in the encyclical. So again, my hope is that Thomas Berry will help elucidate and help us understand some of the depth of what Pope Francis is talking about. So part 1, what is our current situation? So Pope Francis in Laudato Si invites us to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And in chapter 1, he speaks about the problem of a throwaway culture. So in chapter 1, he speaks about these 3 issues. That is, he speaks about the ecological peril, and then that is the issues we have regarding environmental sustainability. He speaks about global inequity, and that is the issues of social justice or social injustice. And then also he speaks about a throwaway culture, that is a decline in the quality of life or respect for life, and that is also bringing about the loss of a spiritual sense of well-being. So Pope Francis is trying to help us understand our current situation, the environmental peril that we're in, the global inequity, and also the decline in the quality of human life that the other 2 are leading toward. So he writes in Laudato Si, the goal of this, of Laudato Si, and of chapter 1, is not to amass information or simply to satisfy curiosity, but rather to become painfully aware, to dare to turn what is happening to our world into our own personal suffering, and thus to discover what each of us can do about it. To turn what is happening in our world into our own personal suffering. So I want to give a presentation now, and I'll let the slides speak for themselves. So I'll let that suffice to be a summary of chapter 1, an assessment of our situation. But let's go now into where I want to spend a lot more time, and that is, how did we get here? Because it's going to be very important in order to know our way forward, to do an accurate assessment of what causes the problems that we have. And here's where Thomas Berry can offer, I think, a lot of insight. Pope Francis speaks about the human roots of the ecological crisis when he talks about how we got into this situation. And he stresses this, that the ecological crisis has human roots. So here's where I want to bring forth Thomas Berry. So Thomas Berry has really inspired me. We were asked to reflect upon or present somebody, talk about someone who inspires us. I was fortunate to know Thomas, and also opportunity to be able to study with Brian Swim, actually, so knowing Thomas through Brian Swim. And he's known as one of the great thinkers of the 20th century. He died in 2009. He was a Passionist priest, so he belonged to the same community that I belong to. He was a cultural historian, trained as such. He was a professor at Fordham University and an author of numerous important, significant books, and also an earth scholar, and he liked to call himself a geologian. So Thomas Berry looks at the situation, and he says we are suffering from a crisis of cosmology. That's how he assesses it. Now, it's as early as 1978. He wrote about the ecological and social challenges of our times and claimed that we're suffering from a crisis of cosmology. Now, cosmology, some people misunderstand that word. It is very different from cosmetology. This is not about makeup, but cosmology comes from two Greek words, cosmos, which means the world, and logia, which means a concept. So we've all been in school where we studied biology, psychology, theology, and then there's cosmology. So what is psychology but the concept we have of the human psyche? So Jung had a concept about the human psyche, Freud had a concept about the human psyche, Adler had a concept about the human psyche, and so forth. And then theology is our concept of God. And so there's scholastic theology, there's liberation theology, there's feminist theology, and so forth. And each one of them offers a different perspective on the divine. So cosmology then is our concept or the way we understand the world. So Thomas Berry says this is our major problem. We do not have an accurate cosmology. So what does he mean by that? Well, here are the points then. The modern worldview or the modern cosmology stresses the discontinuity between the human and the natural world. In other words, in the modern worldview, we live in a mode of consciousness that has established a radical discontinuity between the human and other modes of being. This is Thomas Berry's insight. In other words, we humans tend to see ourselves as an addendum to the world. In other words, we're something that was stuck into the world. The world was made and ready-made, the world came ready-made, and we were put into the world. And so with this worldview, we have become autistic in our ability to relate to the natural world. In other words, as a species, we humans have become so locked up in ourselves that it's almost beyond our capacity to have a rapport with the natural world. And it's also difficult for other species to get in as well. Or to allow the outer world to get in. And so there's almost a total barrier between the human and the non-human in our modern worldview. And so within this discontinuity, nature was seen as an obstacle to be overcome, either through prayer and divine intervention or technological skills. So the pursuit of modern science over the past 300 years was to make humans as independent as possible from the natural world and to make the natural world as subservient as possible to human decisions. Point number two regarding a crisis of cosmology is we live inside of a mechanistic worldview. Now, Pope Francis called this the technocratic paradigm. So Thomas Berry called it a mechanistic worldview. Now, the formation of the modern worldview begins in the 17th century with the publication of Descartes' philosophy. But it was really developed in the 18th century with Newtonian physics. And so Newton, who's considered to be the father, or one of the leading founders, if you will, of the scientific enterprise, Newton looked at the world. And when he looked at the world, he said, well, what kind of world do we live in? And he says, it's a clockwork universe. So Newton was looking for a paradigm, a way of speaking about the world. And he called it a clockwork universe. And he says, this is called a mechanistic worldview. So the mechanistic worldview encouraged the growth of so many technological inventions, also industrial plundering. And then it culminated in the 1880s when the electric and chemical research centers were established, and then scientific technologies were advanced, and then the modern commercial corporations were formed. So the objective then was to make human societies as independent as possible from the natural world, and to make the natural world as subservient as possible to human decisions. And so really, in the modern worldview, with this mechanistic mindset, nothing was left in its natural state. Everything was mechanistic. Therefore, if it's a mechanism, it has no subjectivity. It has, if it's a machine, it's different from something that's living. So in other words, it's inert. We can do with it whatever we want. Thirdly, the crisis of cosmology entails anthropocentrism, which is really the exaltation of the human. And specifically, Thomas Berry speaks about the exaltation of the human in our legal system. Because what happens is, whenever we make environmental progress, often corporations will counter it, and they often win in court because corporations have rights, but the environment doesn't have rights. So in our legal system, only humans or only subjects have rights, and the natural world has no rights because it has no subjectivity. And so we humans have always debated and been unclear about who has rights. Like when our country was founded, the United States, who had rights? White men who owned property. And then eventually, white men in general had rights. And then also it became, then people of color had rights. And then eventually women had rights as well. So in other words, we continually argue over who has rights. Well, currently, the natural world has no rights. All rights are given to the human. That's why it's called anthropocentrism. So other beings are then instruments to be used or a resource to be exploited. So we really have a moral sense of suicide, of homicide, and of genocide, but we have no moral sense of biocide, that is, of killing life systems, or of geocide, which is killing the earth itself. Fourthly, the crisis of cosmology is due to human prowess, and we can almost say within about the last 100 years or so. So humans in the last 100 years have become a major agent of global change. Now, what we're looking at here is the scale of human impact on the planet, because humans are now able to change the physical structure of the planet, alter the atmosphere of the planet, and change the chemistry of the planet on a scale that rivals the forces that caused the ice ages and mass extinctions of the past. So this is being called the age of the Anthropocene. And anthropos meaning human, so the human world, or the human-made world. And I want to speak now about three aspects or manifestations of the human prowess, that is human population, human technology, and human habits of consumption. So first of all, human population. There's just a lot of us on the planet. And you can see on this graph of world population growth that it was about in 1950, there was a surge then of human beings on the planet. So you can see way out before the 1700s, there were less than 1 billion human beings on the planet. Now we're living with slightly over 7 billion human beings on the planet, with it possibly going up to 9 billion human beings within the next 30 years. So this is a huge shift in just the last 70 years, since 1950. So get a sense of this. So things are changing because there are a lot of us. But not only because there's a lot of us, actually, there was a study done that all 7 billion human beings could fit in LA County. But the issue is people got to live. People want homes. People want electricity. They want food. They want clothing. They want transportation. And so we have the modern American home. But of course, the modern American home has to be powered. So electricity. Well, if we trace this back, where did it come from? It came from the earth. So one 100-watt incandescent light bulb burning for 1 year consumes 700 pounds of the earth. And so human beings need energy. We also want water. We want food. And all of that has to come from somewhere. And where does it come from? It comes from the planet. So it has to come from somewhere. So to support the life of 7 billion human beings, we have to look at the growth in human population. To understand the problem, we have to look at the growth of human population. The second one is human technology. Well, every entity that lives, every being that lives alters the earth. You know, a bear catching a fish alters the earth. A bee pollinating a flower alters the earth. A deer eating your vegetables in your garden alters the earth. But we human beings develop technology. That's one of the key hallmarks of our species, Homo habilis, the tool maker. And so it started off rather simply, but it eventually, we increased our power by the enhancement of tools, and then eventually became the plow. So it was actually up until just about 100 years ago that this is what farming looked like. This is in the late 1800s. So we've gone from this in the late 1800s to this. And then not only that, but to something like this. This is the Bagger 288 excavator. And so it's the largest human machine that's made, the largest land vehicle, that is. And so if you look, there are 2 human beings, and there's a large tractor down there on the left-hand side. That's the size of this piece of equipment. It's just massive. So human beings now have amplified our ability to alter the earth because of our technology, our development of tools, unparalleled. And so these are the mountains of Eastern Kentucky. Well, since the 1980s, with ammonium nitrate and diesel fuel, we can now level a mountain and extract seams of coal. That was a technology that developed in the 1980s. And also, in the past century, in the past 100 years, we've also dammed the waterways. So these are just a few examples of how human technology is altering the planet, and how you can see this is the age of the Anthropocene, the era of a human-made world in which we currently live. And then the third point here is human consumption. So we made a switch from an agrarian economy to a fossil fuel economy, a petroleum-based economy, really in this century. Now, the first oil wells was drilled actually in Russia, and then the first one in the United States in Pennsylvania in the late 1800s. And now, in the 20th century, we could not imagine our life without petroleum. In other words, our transportation system is dependent upon petroleum. Our agricultural system is dependent upon petroleum. So many things in our home. What would it be like without plastic furniture, our carpets, even cosmetics? And so our kitchens are like this. They're filled with plastic utensils. And of course, the ubiquitous plastic bag, plastic water bottles, even our children's toys are made of plastic. These are petroleum-based products. And of course, all that has to go somewhere. And so we often talk about, well, I'm going to throw it away. Well, there is no way. It's got to go somewhere on the planet. We do not transport it to Jupiter or Mars. It's got to go land somewhere on the planet. So we not only have the extraction of fossil fuels, which is for the making of the plastics, but then the waste products as well. Also, you can imagine our life has become like this. Shopping centers have become the temples of our modern world. In 1950, the average size of a new home being built in the United States was 980 square feet. In 1970, it rose to 1,500 square feet. And then, according to the most recent data that I could find in 2019, the average size of a new home in the United States was 2,322 square feet. And so again, this is an example of human habits of consumption. And then, of course, we fill our homes with stuff as well. And then when our homes become too full, well, we got to find someplace to store it. You know, in other words, the growth of the storage units have gone on just in the last, couple decades or so. And then, of course, when we consume the earth, we're consuming the habitat that belonged to other species. So we're losing a lot of biodiversity on the planet because humans are consuming the habitat where other species live. And it's not only simple species, but it's also some of the most elegant species on the planet are nearing extinction. So another way to frame this is that if you divide up the biomass of the earth, in other words, if the total biomass of the earth was divided up among 7 billion human beings, each of us would get 4.5 acres. Now you might think, oh, that sounds like plenty for me. Oh, a good share. 4.5 acres, that's more than I own now. But remember, from that 4.5 acres, you'd have to get everything to support your lifestyle. In other words, not only the space to build your home, but from that 4.5 acres, you'd have to get the materials to build your home. You'd have to get the energy to fuel your home. You'd have to get the equipment or the materials to produce your electronics and your cell phone. You would have to get your food. You'd have to get your clothing. Everything would have to come from that 4.5 acres. Well, there's a process called a global footprint. That's why I use this diagram here of a footprint. How many acres does it take to support a lifestyle? Well, they've done studies around the world of this, and in the Congo, the average Congolese requires 2.5 acres to support their lifestyle. In India, it's 2.2 acres. In China, it's 6.2 acres. So they're above what a fair share would be of 4.2. Thailand, 4.7 acres. The average lifestyle in Vietnam would be 3.4 acres. In Israel, 11.7 acres. Again, Israel has to import so much. They live in a desert. When you get to Western Europe, the increase is dramatic. France is way above 4.2 acres. The average French person requires 10.3. In Germany, 10.8. Haiti, which is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, the average lifestyle is only ask 1.3 acres from the earth. Brazil, 7. Mexico, 5.9 acres. Japan, look at those Japanese, 9.4 acres. But when we come to the United States, the average person in the United States requires 16.7 acres to support their lifestyle. Now, this puts it then in a way perhaps many of us can understand. You know, many people at one time believed that we would have a just world if everybody consumed the way Americans do. In other words, if everybody had the American lifestyle, we would have a just world. So our goal was to lift everybody up to our level of living, our level of consumption. Well, this is actually physically impossible, because if everybody consumed at our level, that is 16.7 acres per person to support a lifestyle, it would take 4 to 5 other planets. Look up at the sky sometime and you'll notice there's no other Earth-like planet nearby that we can get materials from. So in other words, we will never have a just world if we, in the affluent world, in the high consuming world don't lower our level of consumption. We will never have a just world because it's impossible for everybody to consume at our rate. So those are then three factors that Thomas Berry speaks about when he talks about the human prowess of the prowess of the humans at this particular point in the story of the earth. And then another one is the belief that the divine dwells in some transcendent realm. In other words, the natural world lacks a spiritual mode of being. The human is kind of the prince or princess resident on the planet, and the planet itself not only doesn't have any inherent rights that must be respected, but the planet itself has no psychic or moral or spiritual dimension to it. We've lost a sense of the universe as being a sacred endowment, a sacred community. In other words, what's sacred is the human. So in other words, we believe that, well, we're blessed, we're spiritual, but if we believe that there's a discontinuity between the human and the natural world, that we were inserted into the natural world, then we are spiritual. God put a soul in us, and then the rest of the natural world is profane. So we're the sacred, and the rest of the world is profane. It's a sense then that God dwells in some other realm. Now, really, the biblical tradition has a lot to do with this. We can say that the Judeo-Christian religious tradition begins with the historical Exodus experience. And so the Bible really stresses God revealed in the history of humanity, and not so much in the natural world itself. And so the Exodus experience is one of get us out of here. And the Exodus experience was further strengthened by this understanding that when we're redeemed out of the world, focusing on being redeemed and sent to another place. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But then the sixth point Thomas Berry makes is, regarding the crisis of cosmology, is that there seems to be within the Western psyche a deep hidden rage against the human condition, is what he calls it. He says it's an unwillingness to accept life under the conditions that life is granted us. It's a feeling of oppression by the normal human condition, a feeling that the pains of life and ultimately death are something that should not be for us. It's something that should be defeated. And so as a priest, I feel a lot of discomfort when I read many of the religious prayers at Mass, where we're constantly asking to be relieved from our sorrows at this time so we can escape to eternity, which is our true home. Now, Thomas Berry dates this with the Black Death. He says a major shift happened in the psyche of the Western world, the Western mind, when the Black Death in the 1300s ravaged Europe. And this went on for some 300 years. The plague would sweep through Europe. And we all know the trauma of a plague, which we recently had with COVID. But this back in the Middle Ages, before people knew what modern medicine was, they didn't know about germs, and there was very little communication with people at a great distance from you. You only knew people perhaps in your own village or in your own valley. But when the plague came in, and we know that some estimates are that half of the population of Europe died in one of the plagues. And 2/3 of the population of Florence died within 3 months. And so this traumatized the Western world. And so at this point, Thomas Berry says, Christian theology made a dramatic shift from understanding redemption to be redemption out of the world, escape to another place. So there was a great dissatisfaction with the earth. And so this dissatisfaction would be made bearable by faith or the expectation of some eternal trans-earthly mode of existence. So we tended to focus upon that rather than accept that suffering and death are part, not a mistake, but actually part of the process of the universe story. So Thomas Berry says the difficulty then is that the assault on the natural world has been carried out by good persons for the best of purposes, that is, the betterment of life for this generation, and especially for our children. So it was not bad people, it was the good people acting for good purposes within, here's the point, acting within the ethical perspectives of our cultural traditions that have brought such ruin on this continent and the entire planet. In other words, he said the problem is good people acting out of an inaccurate cosmology, an inaccurate understanding of the nature of the world and our place in it. So Thomas Berry says that's the problem underneath all the other problems. So now, what's possible for the future? The third point here. So again, Thomas Berry, I'm drawing upon, and he says, it's not simply a matter of altering our ways of acting on a minor scale. So in other words, what's possible for the future? What should we do? So he said, it's not simply altering our ways of acting on a minor scale by recycling or mitigating pollution or reducing our energy consumption or limiting our use of the automobile or fewer development projects. He says, our efforts will be in vain if our purpose is to make the present industrial system acceptable. These steps above, that is, mitigating pollution, recycling, reducing energy consumption, and so forth, these steps above must be taken, but there must be more. There must also be a new era in human-Earth relations. And here's Thomas Berry's great contribution, I believe, that we need a new era of human-Earth relations. And he called that a new cosmology, a new way. And again, a cosmology means our understanding of the world and our place as humans within it. So Thomas Berry then spends most of his time in his writings on addressing a new cosmology. And this is actually the point of Laudato Si. So here's where I think Laudato Si and Thomas Berry have much to dialogue about because they're in agreement, even though they're expressing it in different ways. So Thomas Berry says a new cosmology is understanding the universe story, the story of the universe, that our human story fits within inside the Earth story. And the Earth story fits within inside the universe story. In other words, we wouldn't have a human story if there weren't an Earth story or a universe story. So Thomas Berry wants us to understand that the universe is developmental, that it began as a flaring forth some 13.8 billion years ago. This is what we know now, that the universe did not come ready-made, and we humans were not inserted into a ready-made universe, but rather it emerged as energy some 13.8 billion years ago, and then over that long period of time, it has been transformed from energy to simple matter, like subatomic particles, and then atoms, and then molecules. And then it formed stars, and then it formed galaxies, and then stars exploded. And from the supernova explosion of stars, all the other elements that are necessary for life to form came from a supernova explosion, and thus planets came forth, and our Earth came forth from a supernova explosion of a mother star. And then eventually life evolved, primitive life evolved, and eventually human life evolved on a living planet. So this is what Thomas Berry calls understand, embrace, and get inside the new cosmology. Now, I do a whole course just in that alone, a whole 10-week course in a new cosmology. And so many people have told me that that's one of the courses that's actually transformed their life, is understanding the new cosmology from the perspective of the universe story. I know it certainly has mine as well. But back to Pope Francis and Laudato Si. The subtitle of Laudato Si is Care for Our Common Home. So these three words stand out. Care, common, home. I want to suggest that Pope Francis is giving us a new cosmology with the subtitle of Laudato Si. The new cosmology is, again, understanding what's the nature of the world and our place in it. So Pope Francis says, first of all, the earth is our home. And this is very important to understand that the earth is our home. That's a new cosmology. It's a new way of viewing the world. because we've had many different ways of understanding the earth. Many different cosmologies have been expressed. Throughout history, our view of the world changes, and these are expressed in paradigms. When I was growing up, there was a understanding of the earth as a battleground. In other words, the earth is a place where the forces of good and evil are in battle, and we're to align ourselves with the good forces. So that's a cosmology. The earth is a battleground. The earth is a classroom, that we were put here to learn our lessons, to study, pass the test, and then go to our reward. Or the earth is a trap. It's a valley of tears that we have to suffer through. Or here's the one I used before. It's a machine. That's Isaac Newton's understanding of a clockwork universe, the mechanistic understanding of the earth. Or the earth, this is the modern worldview, is a resource for our consumption. Well, what Pope Francis says is, he says the earth is our home. Now, this is very important because we all know the difference between living in a hotel and at home. In a hotel or motel room, what do? We tend to live carelessly. We turn on the heat and we leave the windows open. We leave the lights on when we depart. We throw the towels on the floor. That's what happens in a hotel. We're rather careless there because we know we're only there temporarily and it's really not my responsibility. But Pope Francis says, when you begin to think of the earth as your home and not simply a temporary residence, but it's really a home, then you are beginning to merge into a new cosmology, a new way of viewing the world. Also, it's our common home. We live in an interdependent planet. We are not independent creatures. We could not exist without the entire Earth community. So we share it with all other creatures. In other words, there is a web of life that Pope Francis speaks about. And all these other creatures should also have rights as well, rights appropriate to their own species. We don't expect all species to have human rights, but couldn't we give rights to birds, have bird rights? Rivers have river rights. Mountains have mountain rights. In other words, they have rights appropriate to their species. Because when we understand that we are living on a home for all species, and we need all of them to survive in this web of life for us to flourish. But also, what's our appropriate human relationship with the planet? And Pope Francis says it's one of care, not exploitation. So here's where I'll tiptoe into chapter 2 of Laudato Si for just a moment, because in chapter 2, Pope Francis corrects what he calls a grave misunderstanding or misinterpretation of Genesis 1:28, which reads, God gives humans dominion over the earth. And this, Pope Francis says, has encouraged the unbridled exploitation of nature by allowing humans to be domineering and destructive of nature. But he clearly says this is not a correct interpretation of the Bible as understood by the church. He says we must forcefully reject the notion that our being created in God's image and given dominion over the earth justifies absolute dominion over other creatures. He says, rather, we must understand this biblical text within the appropriate hermeneutic, and that he refers to then Genesis 2:15, that really recognizing that God gave us the earth to till and to keep. In other words, it's a garden that we are to till and to keep. So tilling refers to cultivating or plowing or working, but keeping, that means caring, protecting, overseeing, preserving, and so forth. So Thomas Berry then speaks about the great work. That's what's possible for the future. There's a great work for us humans to do. So the great work then, Thomas Berry says, is to carry out the transition from a period of human devastation of the earth to a period when the humans would be present to the planet in a mutually beneficial manner. Now, this is very similar to what Pope Francis says when he talks about an integral ecology. So an integral ecology is responding to the cry of the earth and responding to the cry of the poor. So Thomas Berry says then we need to make this transition to be present to the earth in a mutually beneficial manner. That means, in other words, it's what's good, we should care for the earth, not only caring for humans, but we should also care for the earth because the earth is our home. And actually, whatever we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. So if the earth becomes polluted, we become polluted. If the earth becomes toxic, we humans become toxic and we cry toxic tears. This is what's going to happen. So how can we live on the planet where it's going to be good for us and good for the earth? So he's not writing off and saying we should just simply do everything for the earth itself, but rather we should make decisions that are going to be good for humans and for the earth. That's what it means to be mutually beneficial. And so Pope Francis actually hones in on this in a slightly different way. And he speaks about embracing what he calls an integral ecology. That is, he says we cannot separate the ecological crisis from the social justice crisis. We must address both of those simultaneously. And so he makes that great that clarity here. Now, Bill McKibben, who I think many of you have heard of, is one of the leading activists and voices on behalf of the earth. He's been one of the leading activists in the global climate change movement, and well-known scholar, author of numerous books. I attended a webinar with him just a month ago when we had a celebration of Laudato Si. And Bill McKibben says that Laudato Si is the most significant publication in the new millennium. That's saying a lot. That Pope Francis' call for the integral ecology, linking the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, he says, is really one of the most important documents of the new millennium addressing environmental issues. So this is one of the important contributions that Pope Francis makes. You cannot separate the ecological crisis from the crisis of inequity on the planet. And so finally, let's look at the fourth point I want to make here, and that is, where do we go from here? Here's where I withdrew a lot of the material I had because of the lack of time. When Thomas Berry talks about the great work, he lays out a blueprint for moving into a sustainable future, a sustainable and hopeful future. But I want to spend more time, though, with what just happened last month. Last month, the Vatican Dicastery for Integral Human Development, which has been entrusted, it's the Vatican office that's been entrusted with implementing Laudato Si, launched a Laudato Si action platform. And the Laudato Si action platform is a 7-year journey to sustainability. So it's, in other words, what the Vatican is asking is for all Catholics to engage Laudato Si, this landmark encyclical, and implement an integral ecology, all Catholic entities. And so they've broken it down strategically. I'm very impressed with the way this dicastery has done its work. What Cardinal Turkson has done a remarkable job on this, and there's a lot of energy behind this in the analysis, in the strategies, and in the materials they're offering. You simply have to go to Laudato Si Action Platform, and you'll find a lot of resources. So all Catholic entities, they're targeting families, dioceses and parishes, all dioceses and parishes around the world, all Catholic schools, Catholic universities and colleges, Catholic hospitals and healthcare centers, businesses and agricultural farms, and then religious orders, congregations, and associates. So this is the area I've been working in. And it's remarkable. I was on a webinar, a seminar actually, with over 325 religious from around the world who are working on the Laudato Si Action Platform for religious congregations. So I think this is where we need to look at right now for guidance on where do we go from here. Now, the dicastery has identified 7 goals for us to target. In other words, how do you know if you're making progress in building a Laudato Si action platform for your family, your church, your religious community? Well, you would look at, how are you responding to the cry of the earth? How are you responding to the cry of the poor? Also, engage in building what are called ecological economics. That is, it's about ethical consumption and ethical investments. Where do we invest our money? So now there's a whole movement then for Catholic entities to divest from fossil fuels. That's where I was on that seminar with Bill McKibben. He was speaking about divesting from fossil fuels. So Pope Francis and others is encouraging this. Adopting simple lifestyles, that is, being sober in our use of the earth's resources and energy. We have to consume, but how can we embrace the value of Christian simplicity? This is central to the teachings of Jesus. You know, Jesus had a lot to say about how we live regarding wealth and possessions and attachment. So how can we adopt a simple lifestyle? Creating ecological education. This is what's known in many of our communities as ongoing formation. To, in other words, engage in the study of Laudato Si, to engage in the study of the issues and so forth. And then also recovering an ecological spirituality. And here's where the Vatican is really bringing forth a religious or a spiritual vision of God's creation as a sacred endowment. To recover things like, the Vatican has put into place in the fall of each year in September, a season of creation now. So as your parish, as your community observing the season of creation, and we use special prayers, special intentions during that time. Laudato Si week is each May to celebrate the publication of Laudato Si, but also celebrating the equinox, the solstice celebrations, rogation days we used to have, and so forth, to bring forth an ecological spirituality. And then also, finally, promoting community action and advocacy. In other words, working for systemic change. It's one thing to adopt a simple lifestyle personally, and for maybe my institution that I work for. But it's another thing to really work to change the systems. And that's what Thomas Berry was getting at when he says, what we need to do is we need a new era in human-earth relations. So we have to actually change the systems of the modern world, which are actually, it's an extractive economy. It's a terminal economy. It's based upon a misunderstanding of a worldview that's mechanistic. And so how do we work for systemic change? So in conclusion, Pope Francis says, time is running out. Time is running out to fix the economy, protect the earth, and help the poor. But he also says very clearly, we know, though, that things can change. Each one of us can play a valuable role if we all set out today, not tomorrow, but today. So I'll leave you with that. There is seeds of hope for our planet because there's a role that each of us can play if we set out today, not tomorrow, but today.
Thank you, Joe. How great. Your words are prompting dozens of questions in my chat box here. So let me sort through a couple and see what we can tackle here. Joe, one of the comments, borrowing from Wendell Berry, says regarding an extractive economy, that there really is no option for human beings except to live off of nature, that however we survive, we're taking something. We necessarily have to take something. Could you say more about, an extractive economy that destroys versus an extractive economy that does not destroy, if you can?
I'll try to. That's a good point. Because the person is actually absolutely correct. I think I was trying to make that point a moment ago when I said everything that lives it takes something from the earth. Bees, bears, deer, ants, everything is consuming. So yes, to live means to consume. But up until the late 1800s, in the United States, we had an economy based upon agrarian. Now it was an ever-renewing economy. In other words, it would renew itself. The earth would renew itself. But when we begin to have an extractive economy, it's a terminal economy. It will end. There will be a time when fossil fuel is gone. And when it's gone, it's gone. I was speaking to a man who works for Shell Oil Company, and he says oil companies know this. Right now, they're keeping hidden reserves in supply for special needs. Because again, what would our hospital systems be without plastics? What would our kitchens be like without plastics? What would our food system be without plastics? So the big shift then, many people are saying, is we need to move from a terminal economy based upon extracting fossil fuels because they are terminal. And so they're causing great damage to the atmosphere, they're causing great damage to the water systems and so forth. But then how can we find a renewable energy source? This is the key thing. It's looking for renewable energy the focus then is on solar energy, hydro energy, and wind energy and so forth.
Joe, here's a couple of quick ones for you. Somebody writes, which one of Thomas Berry's books should I read first?
I think the one called the Dream of the Earth or the Great Work. Either one of those, The Dream of the Earth or the Great Work. There's a lot of resources available on the thomasberry.org website, a lot of essays he's written. Thomas Berry was really an essayist, so the books are essays, and many of them are available online. Also, I might recommend to you a free course on Thomas Berry on Coursera. So my friend Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, who teach at Yale University, have compiled a free online course on the universe story, understanding the new cosmology of the universe story, and on Thomas Berry and the Great Work. So there's two free courses through Coursera. So you go to Coursera, and you have to sign up. It's free, and then you can choose to audit the course, and you can do it at your own pace, and it's excellent material on Thomas Berry that you don't have to pay for. But the two books I would recommend would be either The Dream of the Earth or the Great Work.
Joe, two church-related questions. The first is, you started off by talking about how Pope Francis intended Laudato Si to be, in some ways, to start a conversation with the human community. How is it that Laudato Si is reaching beyond just the Catholic world? I think a lot of folks are interested in how does this impact the bigger world and not just the Catholic world, which is obviously limited.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it touches the Catholic world extensively. I mean, Jack, this is where I want to put my energy in this next 7 years. If we can get the world's 1.3 billion Catholics, that's 1.3 billion. If we can get 1.3 billion Catholics, or at least a significant percentage of them, engaged in these issues, we could turn the boat around. This could be a significant shift. So I think we as a Catholic community have a great opportunity here, and also a great challenge. So first of all, let us Catholics engage it. But as I mentioned before, somebody like Bill McKibben says this is the most important document that's being written in the new millennium because it is engaging the Catholic community, but it's inspiring others as well. Now, I must apologize. I haven't done a lot of work or study or reading outside the Catholic circles. There's so much going on there right now that it's absorbing all of my time and attention.
And then here's another church question, this one with some discontent. And that is and it's been repeated in multiple questions, sort of the complaint that their local diocese is simply not paying attention to Pope Francis, consequently not paying attention to Laudato Si, and demonstrates no particular interest in environmental concerns. Do you want to speak to that somehow?
Thank you, Jack. Oh, yeah. Okay, there it is. There it is. We don't need to just sit around and be frustrated, but let's get busy and do something. Let's do what we can. And I think we can. We now have marching orders. I think the dicastery, go to the dicastery website. They do address this. They talk about the resistance among some of the hierarchy regarding this, and so they recognize that. But what I found out in my own community is if you begin with some of these Pope Francis videos, they're well done, but they also give you a marching orders. They give you credentials, if you so to speak. And so organizations, that's why organizations like Just Faith are so important, because Just Faith can transcend what's going on, what the diocesan barriers, by bringing the programs into the dioceses themselves without having to go through the hierarchy. So I think, yes, there's a problem, and yes, it's an annoyance, but I don't think we should let that consume us, our frustration consume us, because there's so much good work we can do.
Joe, last question, because we're running out of time. So we do live in a world in which, the dominant narrative is consumption, where people are bombarded with advertisements of all kinds all day long to buy something in order to make yourself feel like you're human. And I'm just wondering, there really is kind of a need, isn't there, to reframe what we mean by the good life, by abundant life, by living life well, by living life with gusto, that moves from extraction to a very different narrative. I was thinking last night, Maggie and I were looking at the moon, which happened to be called a strawberry moon. Last night, tonight, and tomorrow are what's called a strawberry moon. It's a lovely thing. Make sure you go outside and look at the moon tonight. But I was thinking about how we need to, in some ways, change the narrative about what it means to live with joy, what it means to live life well, that doesn't rely on having a relationship where, I'm fulfilled by going to the mall. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's re-envisioning the American dream.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Think about it. What's our identity? What's happening to our children? Our children grow up night after night, day after day, understanding that they are to get a good education, so they can make a lot of money, so they can consume things. Our children are being taught a cosmology with that mentality. It's a consumer mentality. And on the news, what do they call us? The consumers are doing this. The consumer index is up. The consumer index is down. And so we have been defined as consumers, and many of us have bought into that. So I think it is gently challenging that assumption that we are born to be consumers. Now, again, we need to consume in order to live, but can we consume what Pope Francis says with sobriety? How can we be sober consumers in a way that we live our life with simplicity? So yes, it does. I think there's a cluster of values that will help move us in that direction.
Joe, thank you. This was just outstanding. And as is our habit and tradition at these, I'd like to invite everybody to silently clap in your window for Joe, just to thank him for being with us tonight. Thank you, Joe. It was just great.
Thank you, Jack. And thanks all of you for joining in. It's an honor to be with you, to be able to share this journey together and this possibility that we all have now.
So just to remind everybody, Leela will be sending an email to all of you with the video link to Father Joe's presentation this evening. Please feel free to share it widely. Also in that email will be an invitation for you to collaborate with us. Tonight's registration for tonight's presentation was free, and we love providing these at no charge so that everyone can join in. But I'd like to ask those of you who have enough, and maybe more than enough, resources to share in our work. And specifically, I invite you to take a look at the link in the email that you'll receive to see how you can partner in the work of Just Faith Ministries. We share our resources with you, and we ask you to share your resources with us, and together we can provide resources that change people, who then change the world. So I'll close in prayer. Let us pray. Today, now, this moment, I promise myself to reach out and touch the earth. I will dig my fingers into the soil and remember what it is that sustains me. It is not wealth. It is not possessions. It is not achievements. It's not the praise of people. It is this that I touch, the sacred soil, the fertile field, the living land, the holy. Today, now, this moment, I promise myself to reach out and touch a fellow creature. I will run my hand along fur or feathers, shell or scales, and remember what sustains it. It is not wealth. It is not possessions. It is not achievements. It is not the praise of people. It is the ocean, eternal. It is the infinite sky. It's the sun, the rain, the holy earth. Today, now, this moment, I promise myself to reach out and embrace understanding. I will hold to my breast the reality that my fellow creatures and I are equal in God's love. It is not wealth. It is not possessions. It is not achievements. It's not the praise of people. It is food and breath, life and death, the stars above us, and the holy earth. Amen. And thank you all, everybody, for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to seeing you again next month.